Hello, everyone. I hope everyone is doing really well. This week, we have quite a bit to cover this week. We're going to be looking at the end of the First World War. Particularly, we're going to be interested in examining Woodrow Wilson and his attempts to use the First World War to sort of remake the world, if you will, and to remake the role of the United States in the world. So we'll be looking at some select portions of the reading because there's a lot of stuff we could read in here. And of course, we're a compact class, so I want us to focus on certain important items. So we'll be looking at the portion on Woodrow Wilson. Now I'll have the pages up there specifically for you. We're looking at the portion of Woodrow Wilson and the peace conferences at the end of World War I and Wilson's vision for the United States in the world. Woodrow Wilson was really, when it came to international relations and the U.S. role in the world, Woodrow Wilson was really a landmark figure. Prior to World War I and Woodrow Wilson's presidency, the United States really did not feel it had a place to engage sort of in European affairs, to be nearly as internationally engaged as it would be in the 20th century and beyond. And that all really changes with Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson used the First World War to create this sort of notion that the United States should be internationally engaged, and that the international engagement of the United States was a vehicle to the security of the United States. That core principles like free trade, democratic capitalism, these types of things, representative government, were things that Wilson hoped the United States' engagement in the world could sort of spread, and that would produce greater security and peace in the world. His idea of the League of Nations, which the United States never joins, but it was an idea to have a body of represented governments that would oversee peace and justice in the world. And it gave rise, ultimately, the idea to the United Nations, which, of course, we know exists and is headquartered in New York today. So we're going to look at Wilson at the end of the First World War. We are going to examine the 1920s in the politics, particularly of the 1920s. I'm going to have select readings on the 20s as well, because our major focus for this week is going to be the Great Depression and the New Deal. So we're going to go from the end of World War I into the 1930s with the Great Depression and the New Deal. So you can't understand the Great Depression without understanding sort of the politics of the 1920s. So look at the readings and assignments. We're going to look at Wilson a little bit. We're going to look at the politics of the 1920s. We're going to look at the causes of the Great Depression. And then we're going to look at the New Deal. The New Deal was, of course, Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt's answer to the massive economic crisis in the United States at the time. A crisis that in some places witnessed unemployment rates over 50%. A crisis in which there were massive issues with hunger and poverty amongst the elderly and amongst children. The Great Depression was a period in which you had massive amount of people out of work. And there was really there was nothing on the horizon to suggest that the sort of private sector was going to be able to provide employment to Americans. And so the New Deal involved, among other things, it involved creating work programs to put Americans back to work. It involved creating reforms to the banking sector, to regulate the banking sector so that some of the causes with bank runs and the financial crisis associated with banks did not occur again. It led to greater regulation of the stock market, so as to be able to identify when the warning signs of a stock market crash were there. The New Deal is really, in the grand sort of understanding, the New Deal is really the emergence of liberalism in the social sense, in the economic sense, during the 20th century. If you look in large sort of trajectories of history, the period from the Progressive era sort of leads to the New Deal era during the Great Depression, but it's really with the New Deal from the 1930s and the New Deal until really the 1970s, this is an era of time that's really dominated by what historians might call New Deal liberalism. And this was based on the idea that the government could take certain actions to ensure, certain interests of working and middle class Americans in society. The types of things that this period of history brought to Americans include things like Medicare and Medicaid, which were created during the 60s, the minimum wage law, which was created during the presidency of Harry Truman, the first unemployment insurance from the federal level during the New Deal, Social Security during the New Deal, regulations on the banking and market systems during the New Deal. These are all sort of contributions of this period of time. And many of the reforms of the New Deal remain in place today. So you have this paradigm of New Deal liberalism that is influential in the United States really from the 30s through the 1970s. And with the election of Ronald Reagan, you see the rise of what might be called the modern conservative paradigm. In paradigm, we're talking about sort of the dominant sort of system under which things operate, if we might think about it that way. But the period of New Deal liberalism was highly significant for the reasons I've just mentioned, and others. Things like the GI Bill of Rights was ultimately a product of this. And there are many programs associated with the New Deal that remain in place today. The Tennessee Valley Authority, many of you might know about the Tennessee Valley Authority, and you might have gone boating or fishing on a lake created by the dam building projects of the Tennessee Valley Authority, as there were numerous projects on the Tennessee River in the area surrounding portions of Appalachia, or at least nearby, we should say. Not exactly, but nearby. And these were designed to provide cheap electricity for people. These were government-run dam building projects to provide recreation, cheap electricity, and to understand when the private sector was price gouging as well. So we're going to be looking at Wilson and the end of World War I, the politics of the 1920s, and we're going to be looking at the Great Depression and the New Deal this week. I have recorded video lectures up for you. Remember, take notes on those. When you watch those, take notes, because remember, the tests you're taking, they're open note. And I do emphasize on the test things that we cover in class. So I try to emphasize certain things in the class, and those often will appear on exams. And so take notes on those lectures so that you have those there to refer to when you go to take the next test. There will be a quiz this week. It's going to be a short quiz, but I want to give you a quiz this week, and it will be on the causes of the Great Depression, and it will be on the pages, provided you have the same edition of the book as I do. Otherwise, just find this. Pages 887 to 907. And I'll put those in the readings and assignments area in the content page as well. So there will be a short reading quiz this week, because I know we have a lot, and I want to make sure we're thinking about this stuff. So again, my video lectures, and, of course, the factoid, the extra credit this week. So the extra credit this week, a little bit long here. So you know what? I'll make this a 2-pointer. 2-point extra credit. As I mentioned, the New Deal was really about sort of, on one part of it at least, was about putting Americans back to work. The government putting Americans back to work. So during the New Deal, there was a myriad of government work programs. Programs that the United States said, we're going to spend a little bit more money. Yes, we'll run up a little bit of debt, but in the long run, it's going to work out because people are going to get paid and they're going to spend, and then the economy is going to turn. That's how it's going to work. That's how they thought. And it was pretty successful overall, I think most people would argue, though it didn't necessarily solve the Depression. Anyway, there was a myriad of work programs created during the New Deal, and these were things like, of course, I mentioned the TVA, the dam building projects. You had the PWA, the Public Works Administration. You had the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. The CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And the CCC brought young adults to go, and they went and they basically lived in camps near work sites, and they did things like plant trees in the Midwest to be wind buffers, because, of course, you probably know that during the Great Depression there was a massive drought, and then the lack of trees in the Midwest created this massive sort of dust storm called the Dust Bowl. And so they did things like plant trees, they did things like create and develop national parks, among other things. So they did all kinds of amazing and important building projects during the New Deal, fixing roads, building parkways. And so here's the factoid. On the eastern side, shall we say, on the eastern edge of the region that you might call Appalachia, the Appalachian Mountains, there's a parkway called the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it runs from Northern Virginia, and it runs all the way down into Tennessee. And it's right on the sort of the eastern side of the Appalachians, and running right through, in some cases, right through, portions of what you might broadly call the region of Appalachia. The Blue Ridge Parkway was built by a New Deal work program. It was an example of the type of building and the lasting legacy of the New Deal to the United States we know today. Roads like the Blue Ridge Parkway. The work programs of the New Deal even built baseball parks. They built places for the arts and so forth. Not far from the Blue Ridge Parkway is a town called Pulaski, Virginia. And in Pulaski, Virginia, there's a baseball park called Calfee Park. It's a minor league baseball park. And it was also built. It's one of the oldest minor league parks in the United States today that's still active. And it was built by the PWA. It was PWA or the WPA, but it was built by these New Deal work programs. So factoid for this week, the Blue Ridge Parkway and Calfee Park, lasting examples of the significant contributions of federally run work programs as a response during the New Deal to the Great Depression. Let's have a great week. I'll see everyone in the discussion forum. We have a discussion forum this week, and let me know if you have any questions.